Just wanted to give you a little bit more practice solving by square rooting. So we're going to work through a couple more problems here. This is lesson 3.2. This is the second video. If you missed the first one on solving by square rooting, make sure you go back and watch that. It's really important and talks a lot about the different steps that we need to take, okay? So we've got this problem here. Remember that my goal is to first off get the x squared by itself. So I am going to start by adding 19 to both sides. And I get 5x squared equals 61 plus 19 is 80. Now I'm going to divide by 5 on both sides. 80 divided by 5 is 16. Now that I've gotten the x squared by itself, I'm to the point where I can square root both sides, which I'm going to do, giving me x equals plus or minus 4. Don't forget that when you are square rooting, you always have two answers, the positive and the negative root of whatever you are square rooting, okay? Feel free, by the way, as we're doing this, stop the video and work through the problem and then compare to what I get. Or go step by step, pause it, do the next step, pause it, do the next step, etc. Okay? That's a really good way to make sure that you're understanding what's happening in solving these problems. So looking at this one, my first step is going to be to subtract 23. I do have to deal with this 4 over here, but remember we always want to add or subtract first. So I'm going to subtract 23, and negative 41 minus 23 is negative 64. Now I'm going to divide by this 4 here. Remember, my goal is to try to get the squared, in this case quantity, by itself, and negative 64 divided by 4 is negative 16. Now I'm to the point where I can square root, and when I do so, I'm left with x minus 9 on the left side. On the right side, I'm going to have a plus or minus 4i. Remember that when you're square rooting a negative, you take that square root of negative 1 out, make it an I, and then square root the positive number, in this case 16, that is left, okay? My last step is going to be to add 9 to both sides to get that away from the x. So I have 9 plus or minus 4i. Remember when we talked about complex numbers that you cannot combine the real part and the imaginary part? So this just stays as 9 plus or minus 4i. All right, we got another one very similar. This would be a good point to pause it and see how much you can kind of work through by yourself, and then hit play again, see how your steps match what I'm doing, okay? So I'm going to start by adding 19 to both sides, and maybe I should try to write this correctly with some parentheses there. So I have 5, and then the quantity x minus 1 squared. When I add 19 to negative 44, I get negative 25, which I am then going to divide by the 5 that is in front of the parentheses. This gets my squared by itself, so now I'm to the point where I can square root. Looks like I'm square rooting a negative again, which means I'm going to have an I in my answer. 5 cannot be simplified at all, so I'm going to leave this as the square root of 5. And then my last step would be to add 1, making this 1 plus or minus I square root of 5. This is my final answer. I have gotten everything away from x and solved. Remember that we're always looking for two answers. That's where the plus or minus comes in. That's what gives us our two different answers, 1 plus I squared of 5 and 1 minus I squared of 5. Okay? Looking at this one here, this one's not as ugly because I have no parentheses, but I'm still following the same process. So again, pause the video, work through the problem, and then compare your steps and make sure you really understand the order of things that you should be doing here, okay? So I'm going to start by subtracting 45 from both sides, and 108 minus 45 is 63. Then I'm going to divide by 3, which is 21. Now I'm to the point where my x squared is by itself, so I can square root both sides. I don't need to worry about an I this time because the 21 is positive. I should try to simplify that, but I know 21 is 7 times 3, so there's no pairs. So I'm just going to leave this as plus or minus the square root of 21, okay? Now, if it was 24, and I know that there's a couple of pairs in there, I would need to simplify that, make a factor tree, all the steps. But I know 21 doesn't break down very far, and I'm not going to have any pairs, okay? This, as always, has been a production of Conalonzo Inc. We love to teach you math and help you learn more, in this case specifically about solving quadratics. So if you have any questions about solving by square rooting, let us know. Otherwise, take care and have fun doing math.